Is Magic the Gathering, the trading card game that started it all, is it evil? Or at least is it like bad for Christians to play? Is it sinful? Is it a gateway to occulted stuff? Well, in Deuteronomy 18:10, it does warn against the usage of any kind of witchcraft, sorcery, or magic. So, is it suppose that? Magic has a lot of that. It's labeled on all the cards. Is it that simple? Well, hello and welcome to Hidden Values, the show where I, your host, Noah Price, also known as Hero Scrub on my Let's Play channel. I'm here to provide some awareness for the games we consume, whether it's RPGs or in this case, because it's a special video, woo, special! I think this is the real first official, special video. I'm covering Magic the Gathering, the trading card game, which is, awesome and cool, I guess, depending on who you are. It's a very famous TCG game. It's actually the very first trading card game ever. Started all the way back in 1993? Yes, 1993, I got it. Created by Richard Garfield himself, and then published by Wizards of the Coast. While it's not the only TCG or trading card game out there, this has been the reigning champ ever since it first started. But while this game has been king for so long, the question has still kind of been up in the air of, should Christians be able to play this? I know many Christians who were not allowed to play this game growing up, just due to the fact that it did have demons and sorcery and witchcraft. But I also know others who were allowed to play it just simply because, well, it's just a game. But here at Hidden Values, I don't think it's so simple to just call any game just a game. I think it's important, maybe not necessarily dissect completely, but it is important to be aware of the influences and values that are present in the games we play. I believe it does have an influence on our lives and could impact our actions. Now, growing up, I never really got the opportunity to play Magic the Gathering, mostly because of the funds and just never the opportunity. But it was never a game in my case where I was told not to play this game growing up. And yes, that is mostly because of the viewpoint of it's just a game. But now that I'm an adult, I have some close friends, aka my twin brother, who is getting me into Magic the Gathering. So as you can tell, I've spent some money. I am trying to be all a pro player with my sleeves and whatnot, with my cards, and try to be cool with my counters. But I am still very much a new player. So as much as this video could be helpful for you, this video is kind of more for me. So together, let's look at this game and see if it's okay for Christians to play. Now, right off the bat, let's just start with the Bible. The Bible is kind of the cornerstone. It's the foundation on what we believe in and what is true, what is good and what is not. This is something important we need to take in consideration and actually, use. So let's talk about Deuteronomy 18:10 that I mentioned before. Now, at this point, God's people are about to go into the promised land. It's been decades, beyond decades, since they've been able to get this promised land, and they've been journeying to get this spot. And right before, Moses is telling them the law, or for the second time, but telling them the law, last things to keep in mind when you go to the promised land. Some do's, some don'ts that are very important for health, basically. And this section is about following witchcraft or sorcery, and this is greatly in opposition to other nations. Now, God's people were set apart, and they were supposed to be. They're supposed to be following just God and just Him alone, and to rely on Him for knowledge, strength, and wisdom, and honestly, just guidance. But for many other nations, while yes, they had their own gods that they would rely on for plentiful harvests or X, Y, and Z, they would also commonly go to witchcraft or sorcery to try to find some kind of fate or divination to understand what's going on. We even see in the Bible sometimes, even Samuel, who was even the king of God's people at one point in time, ended up actually going towards divination to understand some kind of fate or seers or sorcery. And this is simply taking fate and not trusting God. That is mainly what this text is about, and I think that's important. It's important to understand why this is here. What's the purpose of it? While a straightforward no sorcery at all is, yeah, sure, it's bad, but also it's the why is also important. But I brought this up because as I do research a lot of times on these topics on video games, I do have a group chat on Facebook with a bunch of other Christians, and I tend to like to bring up this discussion. I like to get some feedback on different Christians and see what they're thinking also, and where they've come to terms and as they're walked through sanctification. And this was a text that was brought up as to a simple, clear-cut, nothing sorcery, nothing witchcraft. And the thing is, what is witchcraft, what is sorcery? When looking at Magic the Gathering, the trading card game, I do not believe that anything actually has sorcery or magic. While all these are considered spells and magic, I don't believe it's the same as we see here. The creation of Magic the Gathering was a fictional game. There are some that I've talked to who believe that the creators of Magic, which the creator was Richard Garfield, made it with the intent of making this a cult, making it a step forward to get the younger generations and later on into occult activities. And while there's some more things we'll go into later on in this episode about these influences and these values, I can't say that these sorceries are real sorceries. It's not the same as what was told in the Bible. A real world example of how this text would actually apply to today's term is actually going out and trying to find divination. Stuff like reading palms or other things like looking at the stars for fate. That is more the category that we see within the text. I do not believe this is the same as this. One thing I haven't really talked about on my series of covering games and doing reviews on it is, why do players play the games? I think it's very important, especially since if we're talking about how some people believe that this game is made with the intent of occult activity. I think it's important to analyze why someone would want to play this game. Is it partially because of people who want to be a part of the occult activity? Is that a thing? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why people play this game. Another preference, if you know nothing about this game at all, about rules and how it is, this is a complicated strategy game where you versus one player for the traditional format, and they have some more other formats which we'll talk about later. But if you want to know more about the rules and stuff like that, this is not really the video for you. Don't worry, you could always click on another tab or go to another video and then come back here later if you're really curious about the rules and whatnot. I think the very first one, and it maybe is obvious and I shouldn't talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it because it's important still. It's simply that this game is fun. I understand that many people have grown up with the game, with it being so long, over 2 decades worth, like longer than 2 decades, almost 3 decades, this game has been out. And many people have grown up with this game, and a part of that can play with nostalgia. And so that's why people are still playing it, is because they had some memories at the beginning and they're still playing. So it's like, maybe it's not still fun, but it has to be still fun, and it was fun then for them to get hooked onto this game and to get stuck on it. Hook could be a trigger for some people because it sounds like addiction and it sounds like a problem. We'll talk about that, but for right now, this game is fun. But the second one is that this game is very rewarding. And again, I'm going to be talking different categories, but they do really much intertwine. Like rewarding with it being fun. Like that's why it's fun. It's rewarding. We'll get into it. So it's really rewarding because, as I mentioned before, this game is very complicated because it's a huge strategy game. And it's very rewarding when you do win at a strategy game. That's why a lot of strategy games are very appealing in the first place. While other games may be appealing due to the mechanics that it takes to play the game, whether it's FPS and aiming and fast-pacedness, this is a different kind of paralysis where it's really hard to play mentally. So it's very rewarding once you do accomplish and solve almost that puzzle. Other sorts, it's also rewarding because of the customization in each Magic deck. You get to customize your deck, and for a lot of things, the rules are flexible enough to where you aren't too much set in stone. And this allows for players to be really rewarded with coming up their own style or a different kind of combination that's really well or just fun. Now this next one is a big one, and it's very important. We'll talk about it even more later, but it's escapism. This is the reason why majority of people play, well, games in general. And this is outside of just games. It could be just reading a book and having that story. But escapism is very hard close, true, connected connected with playing games or even just outside of video games. A lot of times we hear escapism and it's used in just solely a negative sense, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Escapism could be very helping with coping in some regards. It's a messy situation, to be honest, but escapism is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing, if that makes sense. For anybody who don't know, escapism is the tendency to seek distraction and relief from unpleasant realities, especially from seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. And we get a lot with RPGs. Just the other day, I was playing Commander with my group of Christian friends that I play with. Commander is another format that Magic actually has, which is a 4-4 versus match. And I was really glad that we played this late night. One of our friends, I'm not gonna go into details because it's not necessarily, but he had just gotten in a wreck. And while everybody was fine and okay, it did end up really costing him a lot, and it really was hard on him. He was having a rough day, but I was glad to be able to come together and for a moment set that aside and just play together and have a good time, have fellowship together. And afterwards, we still acknowledged what had happened, how his day was, we talked about it, but he was better. He was able to, just for a small brief moment, set it aside and breathe. I believe that element of escapism is not bad. I think it could be good within regards. And just that moment of allowing fellowship to take part instead of necessarily a problem happening can be healthy. Now this one, probably a lot of people know this if you actually play the game or many other games that are similar. Some people look at this and see this very commonly in games such as Dungeons & Dragons, but is power fantasy. These are the people who are commonly known for almost breaking the system. They have a ridiculous deck that is very unforgiving, and for them it's rewarding to get that win because of that. Because almost they tricked the system, or they gained it, or they knew how to use it correctly. And because of that, they felt powerful and have more control in their life. While this can be very frustrating for other players, for those players, this is ideal and this is great. But even outside of just those players, this power fantasy is almost integrated with the idea of role-playing. Puts yourself into the game and has that immersion. For me, when you are playing Magic, you are a commander, you are doing spells and sending out your people, and you get to create a story through the game. And even if it's not heavy on the role-playing side of like, this character makes sense with this character and they're fighting, and it doesn't have to always fit like that. But the feeling of commanding different things and having power does integrate with the feeling of control. A lot of people who in life are trying to mount a lot of power are deep down feeling insignificant about control. And they're trying to grasp control on their lives. Without it, they feel weak and insignificant. And so it's this weird balancing act of trying to grasp some power because then they have control, which means they're not weak. And it really is a weird balancing out with trying to build together your own value. But Magic the Gathering, it does have this spot for power fantasy. Sure, not all groups want to be playing with the character that's their main focus is power fantasy, but there's still a spot for it. And the very last one, and I've kind of hinted at it already a little bit, is there's a community within playing Magic the Gathering. And while this is mostly seen while in person playing cards and not necessarily the Magic Arena, no offense to Magic Arena at all, it's a great resource for players who don't want to fork out the money that it costs to play this game and just want to play a free game and get their tippy toes into it. I do think Magic Arena is great for that, but being in person allows you to step into the community that is there. And there's nothing about this community that I have to say is a cult. There's nothing there that's like that. Instead, what I do see commonly is people who have been rejected and just want to step aside and have a good time and be welcomed and to be appreciated. I want to preface too, while it seems like I could easily be biased about this, I probably am in some regards. That happens easily. The point of this is whether I'm biased or not, I think it's important to analyze this to make sure, because let's be honest. The worst thing that these could do, if these are really sorcery and or witchcraft and cultive, that's not good for me. That's unhealthy and it's dangerous. Just let alone based on the text of Deuteronomy 18:10, if you keep on going, it clearly says after that God is disgusted by it. Doesn't want it at all. And so why would I risk that just for some enjoyment? That's why stuff like this of analyzing this is important. And there's nothing there that's cultive. Now, is it Christian friendly? Well, that's maybe not always necessarily the case either. And yeah, that community might be sinful. It might be dirty. But as mentioned before, it's also somewhere where there's been people who've been outcasted, judged, hurt. I think it's important to look at both of those sides of it. Now, there's 4 real things that we need to take in consideration when talking about magic. 4 real problems that's in this game. The very first one, as mentioned already, is escapism. While this is prevalent in many other games and is possible there, it's possible here. It really is. When you ignore problems and not deal with stresses in your life and you take responsibility, you simply don't grow. You actually, just like somebody who lays in bed and stays bedridden for too long, you get much worse. Well, it seems like you're playing the safe side, you're not growing. You're not strengthening yourself. Through stress and dealing with problems is how we grow the most, even though it's the hardest. Magic Gathering is a spot to where we can get too focused on and get hooked on focusing on. There's so many different formats and so many different things you can do in Magic that it's a lot of avenues to get fixated on and focus on and ignore other things. Closely connected to this sometimes is the identity problem. The moments when you take Magic the Gathering and it's your identity. It is who you are. A lot of this can be very small, with just simply like losing a game and getting super frustrated. I get it. It's okay to get a little bit frustrated and get invested in a game, but when you are consumed by it to where your worth is dictated on whether you win or lose, that is a big sign that this is becoming integrated into your identity. And for a Christian, the only thing that should be your identity is Christ. Because the thing is, this isn't a Christian game. It doesn't just have Christian value. It has worldviews and other things that are kind of corrupted with sin. Not necessarily they're just bad, but they're not necessarily good either. Integrating that and holding on to that as your identity could be holding in some very poisonous stuff. The third one, and probably the biggest one that people wanted me to talk about this whole video outside of the sorcery, is the creatures. There's demonic creatures in it, woo! I mean, there's also angels, but even though they're a little bit not accurate to what they are, a little bit about demons and angels and all that's in this game. The creator Richard Garfield, when he made this game, he used demonic creatures or demons and angels as archetypes. Things that worldwide people can associate and see and actually be like, oh, I know what that is. This isn't some weird foreign thing. And while there is a lot of weird foreign creatures in Magic, this is why this was put into place at the very beginning. They're just archetypes, and as we see in many stories, it's very common to just grab archetypes and use it in your stories. Stuff that's already made that we know works. I mean, even in the beginning of Magic, they took out demons and instead changed it to horrors just because they're worried of conspiracies and problems with the media and people not liking it because it's too controversial. Then later on, a lot of stuff like Lord of the Rings, Hellboy, and other stuff with very demonic things started coming out and people were fine with it, so they decided to put it back in. And again, this was never a thing that was put in because of the influence of evil or because of this. Can it be used for evil? Yeah, I think it very well can be. I would say a lot of cards in here do show demonic things in a good light. Maybe not in a good light, but it's in an appealing light. It's cool. Even if it's like, it's clearly bad or it's clearly labeled as like a villain, something evil, it's still in a way that's like, ooh, I want to use this for the power fantasy of being the villain. So that is there. It is looked at as kind of an appealing way. And a lot of it also, it has some sexualized things in there. Again, making it appealing. So let's not ignore it and say that it doesn't exist. It does exist. Demonic creatures in this game, weird creatures in here. Some of it is just weird to be weird, and that's not necessarily bad on its own. But stuff where it is demonic creatures who are made in a way to be appealing, maybe sexualized. Yeah, we should be aware of that. We should be aware of that. We should know that's there. Now, I'm not saying that if you see something sexual, you should run away. That's because I can't really make that decision. An important thing always to keep in mind with my videos is this is not a you should or you shouldn't look at this. It's not so simple as that. For me, I had a drug addiction. Being around things that have kind of a trigger for drug usage, I have to be aware of and have to really distance myself from. Other people who may not have that drug addiction in the past don't have to worry so much about that. And that's something that always has to be kept in mind when looking at these video games. It sometimes is a player by player situation. It is something where you do have to have conviction, or you need a community of Christians to talk to and be like, hey, is this okay? Can you keep me accountable? Countable. Can't say it, you know what I'm talking about. For the sake of being safe and righteous and healthy and safe. And the last one, and probably the most devastating it feels at times, is the pricing. I know this sounds like a joke at some parts, but it's kind of there. Magic the Gathering is known for not being a cheap game at all. It is very expensive, easily. It's easy to expensive. It doesn't have to be. Of course, there's Magic Arena. I think that's a good spot for players who do want to take their first step and one, are too shy to have people to play with, like me. Grow up and go find people and try to integrate and talk to people and make friends. That's important. That goes for me too. But the other thing is, if you're too worried and you just want to take a few steps without paying money, Magic Arena is good, and it's on mobile now, so, you know, that's something if you like that. I don't like it, I do desktop, but it's there, it's free. But other than that, Magic Gathering can be easily costly. Some of the pre-made stuff, which is fine, you can start there, but sometimes they start from 20 to 30 to 40 to even more, and that's just the starting spot. To get sleeves to protect your cards, it costs more. Playmats you can buy, it costs more. Dice, all that adds up quickly, and that's just with possibly one deck. A lot of times, people, if you really like Magic, you'll make a bunch of decks. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that it's not necessary to pay all this money. Like, you don't have to. You don't have to. But are elements at times where it does feel pay to win. There are better cards and they cost more to buy. And so it can feel very pay to win. But there are channels like the Commander Quarters, who is a big channel, very much focused on building decks that are on a budget, and looking at resources like that, you know, it can help. I think it's important to keep in mind how much money we're spending on X, Y, and Z, because it's ultimately not our money, it's God's money. So we should keep in mind how we're spending it. I believe as a Christian, it's important to know yourself. Like for me, as mentioned before with drug stuff, it's important to know yourself because it is important for Christians to evangelize. I know this is a weird part to take, but evangelizing is important. And it's not necessarily just going door to door and saying, hey, have you heard of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? Even though Mormons are more known for that than Christians, which is, I don't know if it's necessarily a good thing, but it is a reality. But evangelizing can simply just mean showing love as God has showed love to you. Doing that to other people is important, and it's really needed. Now for me, I struggle with this because, as I mentioned before with the drug stuff, is I need to know where I can do that and where I can't. Going somewhere where I know there will be drugs usage, I can't go. But knowing myself and trusting that God will use somebody else in that situation is good. And I say this to say just because with Magic the Gathering, the community there doesn't need Jesus. There's a lot of people there who don't feel loved and don't feel welcomed and feel judged and really hurt. They feel devalued and important. For Christians, I believe it's very important, and it is a place for God's people to show love while just having fellowship and community. I think it's important and it's good. But it's also good to keep in mind what problems you may have. If this is something that bothers you, whether it's just the fact of sorcery or magic or anything like that, or if it's because of the possible sexualization that's in some of the creatures, or even just the environment of the community. If it is too negative for you, it's unhealthy, then maybe don't. But for a lot of Christians out there, I would say me included, I think it's a spot for me to show God's love. Again, maybe not necessarily stepping down table, putting down my cards, be like, Have you heard of Jesus? Maybe I could try that, but maybe not necessarily. Maybe what's more important is just having a good time and showing God's love. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like down below or just watch my other content that's also really enjoyed. Appreciated? Appreciated. Yes, this was the first ever special video. I hope you guys liked it. The special videos are non-RPG games. Usually it's video games, but this time because I really am just getting into this, I thought it was important to play this. Also because it's you know, the latest expansion, the Midnight Hunt, is werewolves, which is, you know, kind of Halloween themed. So I thought it would work. I don't know. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you do play Magic or don't. Again, as I was talking with other Christians on my Facebook group, like it was interesting to get the conversation going of people who do play Magic at Christians and how they do it. Some Christians, how they do it is they only play Angel deck, which is kind of how I play. I usually play white deck, even though it's kind of known as the trash one.